Today I'm joined by Andris, who built the Node mailer, and if you ever sent an email from Node.js app, you probably used his code. It gets more than 10 million downloads per week, but there is a catch. That project doesn't make him any money. His actual business is email engine, self-hosted product. He sells to SaaS companies through license key subscriptions.
So my first business model was donation based. At best I made like 500 euros per month, but it's not something to live on. So recurring revenue was $14,000.
Can you maybe start us off? Like, who you are, what do you do, and what does your business do?
I'm Andris. I live in Estonia, in Tallinn, and I've been let's say startup worker for last 15 years or more. For example, I was one of the early developers in Pipedrive. It's a large CRM company that was sold for more than $1 billion some years ago. When I started there, it was less than 10 people, and it was actually uh, located inside another office behind some cupboards. So
Nice.
it was like extremely small company, but they had like big ambitions, and they actually hired me to do the very same thing that I now do with the email engine. The point was to uh, be able to, from the CRM perspective, to be able to. Was like a sales CRM, so they wanted to access the mailboxes of the salespersons using the CRM, to do so, they needed some kind of email integration system, uh, which if you like do it for like a one account or two accounts, you can do it really easily with any kind of email access library. Like in Node, there's Node IMAP and IMAP libraries in PHP and so on. But the issue is that they did not want to connect just one account, but thousands accounts or even more. So, which was uh, way more complicated. Uh, in the end, the project actually didn't succeed, and they switched over to a service called Nilas. So my code was only used in like this like prototype just for testing and so on. But the idea stuck with me. So after about probably 10 years or so, when I had already left Pipedrive a long time ago, I saw that there's still there are like lots of smaller companies who do not have the resources to build this kind of integration, and they also maybe can't use Nilas. This is like a software as a service subscription like service because they charge per connect mailbox. So let's say one connected mailbox costs like $1 per month, and you have 10,000 freemium users. It would mean that you would be paying every month 10,000 for this service. So it's not an issue for large services, but quite a large problem for smaller companies, especially with these ones who have a large number of free users or users that don't pay much. So I basically did the same thing that I already did in Pipedrive, but this time, after 10 years of more experience, I did it the right way, and this time I did not fail. So I already knew what might go wrong from my like the original project. So it's so I ended up with this working solution. Mm,
This
Yeah.
is nice. That's a cool story. I like how you took something that you saw that that's missing on the market and just made it yourself, right?
Yeah,
Before we
yeah, I wanted to say that basically I'm targeting the pipe drives of that time, because right now Pipedrive is like 1,000 person company, like huge like corporate, but I'm targeting my customers are basically companies
yeah
that are Pipedrive 15 years ago or 12 years ago.
yeah
With maybe 20, 30 like people working there, and also not having maybe few thousand customers, but not huge companies.
That makes sense. And before I'll dive deeper into the whole company, but I want to touch on something which is like you have a lot of projects that are open source, right?
Yes.
And only one, like just one of them is getting more than 10 million downloads a week, which is like just thinking of that number and that how big of a volume that is. Like, can you put that into perspective? How does that feel? Like knowing that like millions of people are using your product and it's making their life a lot easier and you're helping them. And yeah, kind of, how does that feel?
Let's say that once you hit some kind of numbers, you don't feel any different if it's growing.
Yeah.
I was extremely excited when NodeMailer hit 500 stars in GitHub. This was like very long time ago. It was there were like 50,000 downloads per day. These numbers seemed like completely unbelievable.
Yeah, that's
Today, it is,
insane.
today these numbers are peanuts, but uh, but uh, but uh, but it's not like once you had drank the full glass of water, then you are not thirsty anymore. So it's if you drink the next one, then it doesn't make you feel any better. So it's the same with these numbers. So it's really great to see these large numbers. I have other projects as well that are fairly popular, but uh, not as popular as NodeMailer, but popular general. So it's maybe uh, let's say something hits 100,000 downloads per day, it's still quite a large number, but it's
Yeah.
very small compared to NodeMailer. So it's yeah.
Yeah, all of these are insane, and that's really like I can imagine how that can be. And there is a threshold, like you said, like 10 million a week. Like that's even hard to fathom. Like how many people, how many companies, how many startups are using that, which is insane. And also your current company, like Email Engine, the one that you make money with, also started as open source, right?
Yes, I started it as yet another open source project at first, and I knew that companies might use it, so I was hoping to get donations. So my first business model was donation based. Uh, but it turned out that these small companies do not want to pay pay so much donation. Some did. I actually I think at best I made like 500 euros per month
Hmm.
from GitHub donations, but obviously this is not
Sustainable.
it's extremely yeah it's extremely nice to get 500 euros per month just for doing basically nothing or just doing writing open source code, but it's not something to live on. This so next made this license change that which was only possible because just from the first line of code, I started asking for the contributor license agreements from anyone making a pull request, because you can't change the license of the project mid-flight just because you want to. Because if somebody commits just one line of code into your project via pull request, then they own that line of code, and you can change the license for this without their permission. So I used the contributor license agreement system. So anybody making a commit signed that they give all the rights to the committed code
Owner.
to me. Yeah,
Mm.
so I was able to play with the licensing. I went started using this two license system. That the publicly available code was AGPL, and if you paid, then you got the MIT version. And my thought was that companies do not want to use AGPL because it's has this all kinds of limitations and stuff. And it turned out that the small companies do not care about licensing at all. It's just if you download it and you can run it, and that's fine. Yeah, it's nobody even looks at the license. Maybe the large businesses are more knowledgeable of this,
Yeah, for sure.
but they are not targets of this software. So the, I think I over like a year and a half I got three customers, and these were like pity customers because they just wanted to support me and they didn't need the
License.
whatever they were paying for at all. They just saw that I was doing this cool thing and they just wanted to uh, give a hand, and that's it.
Okay, so after these two failed attempts, right, and not
Yeah.
making any money, what kind of changed for you that you wanted to start and get some money for this? Were you still working at that time somewhere, and then this was just like a separate thing that you did on your own time?
Yeah, I was still working in my previous job. I was actually a technical co-founder of a VC funded startup, but basically I was the first engineer that was named as the CTO. I was not, I was not never really no, at the level of actual CTO, but we had three people at first, so I was the CTO and a minor shareholder because I was the first engineer who built the system. So
Mhm.
I would still so even though I had a fancy title, I still considered it just another like engineering job. So I was working there, and uh, when I started this email engine thing as a like side project, and when I saw that my double licensing system is not generating any revenue at all, I think I made like less than 1,000 euros per year. So it was even less than from donations. So but I saw that from the like users list that there were like real companies were using it. The project was not called email engine, but it was called IMAP API at that point. So because it was just an API layer on top of the IMAP protocol. So I saw that there is something there. There are actually actual companies using this, the same exact companies that I wanted to target, but for some reason they just don't want to pay for it. And I understand why would you want to pay for just for fun, basically, because you're not getting any value from them. You get the exact same thing without paying anything. So
Yeah, why would
it's
you?
why would you pay for it? So it was clear. But I thought that maybe they would pay for it if it's like mandatory. So I changed the license yet again. I used Chat GPT to generate me an end user license agreement because I didn't want to copy any existing one. I just it was still GPT 3.5 or 4 probably. It was one of the like really old versions, and it, it generated me quite a nice agreement document to replace the AGPL license with. So I also did just to justify the like the pricing. I did wrote a new web interface for email engine.
Mhm.
Previously, it was like it's just this one page settings page and nothing else. But now I added this like management stuff and so on into the web interface. So it and login. So you could just actually create an account and log into the dashboard and see some metrics and so on. But the underlying technology was exactly the same as previously. It didn't change at all at that point. So, and I released it as email engine version 2, and this version 2 required a license key to operate. And to get the license key, you had to get a paid subscription for my homepage. And to my great surprise, at the first month, I got 10 subscribers. And one of them was actually someone from Apple, because it turned out that Apple was using this IMAP API in some kind of internal corporate system for training some vendors or something, some completely random project. And it was obviously, it was not like the real Apple, the customer, because otherwise I would have to go through all the like the vendor management process, like filling all the compliance forms and so on, and get into the vendors database. But it seems that just the project manager of this project just used their own credit card to buy the subscription and use it. But
That's so cool.
uh, yeah, and so I saw that I have already this a few customers, and one of them is Apple. So even though I'm not making much money yet, it was like there's definitely something in here. I continued building it, but the next month was pretty much zero revenue because all the 10 companies that from the previously were using it and were willing to pay already got the subscription. So next month I got like maybe one subscriber, but from then on every month I got a few more subscribers, and by after like I don't know, 5 or 6 months, I saw that my monthly recurring revenue is already at 500 euros, uh, which was still not much, but it was clearly growing. And this time it seemed like an actual business already. And this is when I decided to jump ships, and I quit my previous job and started working with Email Engine full time. Uh, because I knew or saw that there was potential to reach this kind of revenue that I would use to pay myself like an actual salary. Yeah,
This
so
is
yeah, I remember this was exactly about 500 euros per month when I went full in.
And how long did it last from getting 500 a month to actually being able to live off of it and pay yourself a salary and maybe even some reinvest something in the business if needed?
I think it was about 1 year because what happened was that I had obviously 500 euros is not much anywhere, so I didn't cover my expenses at all, but I had some savings. So for about half a year, I was living off my savings, and I did not touch any cent the company was making. So everything that was made just ended up in the company bank account, and the number was growing each month slightly. So at when I had burned through all my savings, I had some money on my company bank account. So I started paying myself salary, but the business was now burning money because I was paying myself more than the company was making. But at the same time, the revenue grew every month as well. So and about 1 year after it was probably about a year or a bit more. I hit this this equal state where the company was making enough money to pay myself. Still no profit, but I was on the green. The company was not burning money anymore, and this was great because I had spent all the
Money.
cash that the company had on this bank account, and then from there it's been like pretty like nice going. So it's because the company is making more money than I pay myself, so it's not an issue at all anymore. It current I checked the monthly recurring revenue was 14,000 US dollars. So it's for in Eastern
That's
European,
insane. Yeah.
like in Tallinn, it is. And I have no costs at all because I'm not selling like a service, but license keys for downloadable software. So there are virtually no costs at all related to providing this service. So I can pay almost everything as salary or take out dividends or whatever. So
Nice.
now I don't have to worry anymore about it.
That's insane. And what, like, 14,000, that's with literally almost 100% margins. That's really amazing. And what kept you kind of going So you're in this position where your software makes like $500. You just leave it there, and you're burning through your savings and everything you made your whole life, right? And then you lose all that because you spend it, and then you go to spend company money, and you almost lose all that. And then
Yeah.
finally something comes through, and you're finally making enough to live off of it, but still non-profit. What kept you going? Going through that period, right? It's still like you need money, right? And this is working, but maybe not enough, or
No, it somehow happened that growth was it was linear, but it was extremely stable. Somehow each month added the same amount of new revenue as the previous month. So it was I could just basically draw a line with just straight line and predict when I would hit the
mm-hmm.
like
Stable state.
profitability. Yes.
Yeah.
So this was something that kept me going. If I got extremely lucky with it because it actually went through. It could just happen that I was mostly lucky because at that time AI was not a thing so much
Mm-hmm.
or at all because I got all the visitors and new subscribers from the home pages of my open source projects like NodeMailer's homepage and so on. So anyone visiting NodeMailer's homepage uh, uh, might have been interested in email engine as well because email engine had some additional email sending capabilities that NodeMailer does not have, like the Microsoft Graph API uh, and some other stuff as well.
It feeds. It just feeds customers who are craving more to something that they should pay
Yeah,
for.
basically, yes. Yeah, it's just that I used to have paid ads at NodeMailer's homepage. These made me like not much, about $150 per month. So I removed the ads and replaced ads with my own email engine ads, and also just did some product placement, so to say, and added in the documentation that hey, the NodeMailer can do this, but it can't do that, but you can do that with the email engine, and just go there and it didn't like NodeMailer gets like or got not about 30,000 or up to 50,000 visitors per month. So only a small number went to email engine and even smaller number started
Paid.
subscribing. But I didn't need much because I charged per year, not per month. So I only needed a few subscribers every month to to grow the business sufficiently. So it's
That's cool.
yeah, so the like the actual uh, percentage of people visiting NodeMailer and becoming subscribers was extremely small, but it was enough. So it was so it worked out well. But today I can just say that with AI, the visitor counts have dropped like significantly, and also actually the email engine is growing slightly less than it used to. And I think I can only attribute it to the fact that
Yeah.
less people are visiting the documentation pages and end up at the email engine's page and just discover the project.
So more people are using NodeMailer than ever, right? It's the
Yes.
peak. Everyone is using it, but less people are going to your docs, reading how to set it up, and then funneling down to your actual business because AI does it for them. Correct?
Yeah, exactly. So if you want to use NodeMailer, you just tell Claude or Codex or whatever, just
Install
to
it. Yes.
set up a NodeMailer and start sending emails. And that's it. They don't go to NodeMailer's documentation page to figure out what actual
How
configuration
it works.
settings are. So the visitor count has dropped about 40%, I would say, and the growth of email engines also dropped about the same. So it's still growing, but growing more slower than it used to. But as I don't have any employees. I get enough money, and it's still growing. So I don't really worry about it. It's just something to wonder about.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, it's weird how many implications AI has without even thinking about them. You wouldn't be like able to notice this, right? But being in the midst of it, you can see exactly. Devs are reading less docs, meaning you get less organic traffic. Are you doing anything to subset that, or are you really not worrying and just leaving it to be?
Yeah, I'm not really worrying at all. And also, the upside is that many, if not most of all new email engine customers are AI services. Because
Okay.
there are lots of services that need to access user emails for whatever they're doing, like uh, I don't know, finding calendar appointments from the emails, or I don't know what they're actually doing with this, but AI is accessing emails and they need to do it at scale. So they have the same issue as Pipedrive had. You can't just randomly spin up 1,000 PHP IMAP instances and not crash your server. And also there are a lot of edge cases. Email protocols are standard and unique, and everybody should follow these. But in reality, each implementation is slightly different. So there are like lots of edge cases, and this is something you just can't easily go through. If you're building a service that only needs to access your own mailbox for example, you are setting up some kind of customer service system that you have a support that domain email inbox, and you create a script that goes and checks all the emails in that mailbox. Then it's extremely easy to do because you have only the single target. And you know there are no surprises, like email server behaves exactly the same way every time you connect to it. There's like nothing changes there. But if you do it like you had 1,000 random mailboxes, some from Gmail, some from Outlook, some from some self-hosted stuff, then Fastmail, some Asian providers like QQ or Korean Naver or Japanese Yahoo, which is also different. And each behaves slightly different, and you end up, first of all, you start hitting all kind of mm, uh, system
Blockers.
resource issues and the blockers, and also uh, you might discover that your script does not work with some service providers at all, but you don't maybe even know about it. You just see that there are no new emails ever coming in from for this inbox. And there's tons of stuff, and also the emails are there are decades of different kind of layers on top of layers. So even parsing an email can be like really difficult, but the email engine handles everything for you. So, for example, these AI software companies, for them, they just run their email engine instance. They use REST API calls to add new accounts with like email credentials. And when they ever need an email, then they just make another REST request and get not like the raw email source, the EML file, but structured JSON with Unicode strings and base64 encoded attachments. So it makes it way much faster and more efficient. And so they can do their AI thing, whatever that thing happens to be.
Makes
So
sense.
it's one end I lose customers because they don't find my service anymore. But on the other hand, the ones that you are also from AI
AI
wave,
sphere.
so I'm getting from the both ends. So the situation is not bad, I would say.
Yeah, that's good. And how do you yourself use the AI daily? Did it change your workflow, especially as a developer, as someone technical who's building stuff? How are you utilizing it? What are your thoughts on it? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Where
Y-
are you at?
Yeah, I used quite a lot. I have the Claude Code, the Max 20 plan,
Hmm.
so because I use it for example, for customer service. All my customers are technical people. There are no one asking how to reset your password or anything like that. They usually, when they write to me, there's maybe they provide an error stack trace or something technical. So it's and it might be quite a lot of work to actually dig through the code and find out what's going on and why they had this error. But now again, just say to Claude Code that here's the code base, here's the user issue, figure out what's going on. And I could do this myself, but Claude Code does this so much faster. And it just
Yeah.
at one point says that okay, that's the issue, or 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 maybe there is no issue, that the user configured something wrong or whatever was happening. But if there was an issue, then Claude Code even says that, do you want me to fix it? And said, yes, fix it. And I can just make a new release and say to the customer that, hey, there's new release that fixes your problem. So
How
it's
does how does your day-to-day then look like? Like you're a solo founder, you're only one, right? There is no team members, nothing. It's only you. What do you do
yes.
day-to-day to maintain this and then, of course, try to grow it?
Yeah, but it's at this point my like main feedback back comes from customer issues. So it's
Mhm.
just to, for example, somebody discovers that they are connecting to this random email server in some random location in some another part of the world, that in Africa somewhere or whatever, and it does not work. So I can just start figuring out what's going on there, just to maybe try to get a test account. Sometimes the customer provides me a test account. Sometimes I pay for it. I have like tens and tens of paid email accounts in all kinds
Mhm.
of services just to be able to test these. Mm. And once I get access or some kind of information what's different, then I can fix this thing. And so or yeah, and also all kind of other edge cases. Like I don't really work on new features anymore because there's uh, all that I don't want to introduce like this like feature creep that I used to do at first. I added all kinds of great ideas that I had into email engine and regretted it later quite a lot because these are things that email engine users can usually do themselves. But if I just add something and just it stays there and I don't really maintain it, then suddenly
Liability.
it's liability. It starts generating like user issues, and only from some few users who actually use it. It's I have a few like 200 like paid customers, and 99% of them never use this feature, but 1% does. And now it seems fi- turns out that I have to spend a lot of time fixing or figuring out how to solve these things. And uh, one of these features was syncing emails to Elasticsearch. So at first, the email engine had this feature where you could just configure Elasticsearch credentials and the URLs and stuff. And email engine started syncing all the emails from all connected accounts to this Elasticsearch instance. And the point was that you can make way faster and better search queries against Elasticsearch than you can do against email servers. Uh, because all the emails are cached locally and indexed locally and so on. But it turned out that this was extremely difficult to do, and in some cases not even possible, because I just to save like system resources, I used this basically Delta Sync. I was just detecting that this email account has new emails or some emails were deleted or whatever, and updated the index in Elasticsearch accordingly. But at scale, uh, the system started failing because it turned out that detecting from email servers all these changes is not reliable enough. There are like no transaction feeds or anything. You just check, compare this state against previous state and hope for the best
For the
that
best.
you but it works fine at first, but after some time ended up that the data in the Elasticsearch cache was stale. Some emails were missing and some emails were never deleted that didn't even exist in the mail server anymore. And uh, and it was like really hard to fix, and there were only a few users who actively used it. And they were, because it was not working very well, they were generating a lot of customer support tickets. Rightfully so, because they were trying to use a service and it didn't work as it intended. And I was spending basically all my time just
On
fixing
that.
these kind of issues on that feature that almost no one used. But the ones who used had a lot of problems with it. And so at one point, I just uh, soft deleted this feature. So it's if you were already using this feature in like 3 years ago, then you can still use it in the current email engine because the feature actually works, but it's not available if you install a
For new
new
users.
email for new users. It's not in any way advertised in the
That's
API
smart.
documentation or visible in the web interface or anything. It's just it's if you know how to use it, then it's still there, but no one knows it unless you've been using it for several years. So I said to them that they should probably migrate to some other service or start using some other solution for it, but and as long as they want to, they can just keep using it as it is, but there are no fixes or anything coming anymore for this feature. So
Yeah.
it was a hard lesson for me, and also felt really bad communicating this to these users because I I can't blame them to because at first I
Yeah,
was
of course.
advertising it as a like an actual working feature. It just turned out later it's not working very well at all.
Yeah, a lot of founders that come to us have like they have thoughts of all these features that they want on their product, especially if they are just launching. And our biggest advice is always just cut it down to something like an MVP, ship it out, and then mold around it because you will introduce 10 features out of the gate. People will use two of them, and other eight will just generate problems for you. So
Yeah,
I know
exactly.
how it
Yes.
feels. Yeah, it's really tough, and it's tough to make a cut, especially when you are just launching. You just think, I need all this. I need to be like this big company. Like, no, go small, learn and adapt. So yeah, one thing you mentioned to me is like you built your company around you learned from what you seen on your previous jobs, right? In your previous workflows, where you saw something that they are doing bad, and then you just don't implement that to your own company. Like, do you have an example that's like a biggest thing you saw somewhere and deliberately didn't do it here, even though it might make you more money short term, but would stress a lot?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they also other companies were doing it wrong. They were doing it wrong in the sense that it requires a team or more people
Mhm.
than just one. So, so I would say that they were doing it right, but it's not right for me. That's would be the. But so a few examples would be the same, like providing a software as a subscription service. It means that you need to keep the service running 24/7 because the users can and want to use this anytime they need to. And especially with something like as fragile as this email connecting stuff, there's a huge risk that it just goes down because some user generates request that uses a lot of resources or whatever. So, or the some kind of server stops working, the email servers, and suddenly some of the email accounts requests do not work anymore, and so on and so on, or timeouts, and so uh, it would be extremely hard to provide a reliable service. Uh, so so my lesson was from my previous company where I was the let's say CTO, the founding engineer. It meant that when we hired new people, they were uh, all developers building stuff that made the company money. So they were building new features and whatever the customers demanded. But stack needed to be still up, but we didn't have money to hire like a SRE team or anything. So it meant that I was responsible for keeping their service up. So I was taking my laptop with me everywhere, just in case just something
Something
happens.
great.
So I can just log into our AWS account and start restarting some servers or cloning or whatever. And it uh, didn't happen often. Actually, it was quite a rare occurrence, but I always had to be ready. So this was like training energy like all the time because I knew that uh, I can't go to spa with my family without taking my laptop with them. So and checking from my
Something broke.
smartwatch notifications that something broke, and just had to jump and go to the wardrobe and get my computer and start fixing things. So so it was like mentally training. So this is why I didn't do it as a service, but as downloadable software. So users download the software, they run it on their own infrastructure, and uh, uh, they
More
probably
technical, right?
already, yeah, more technical, and they probably already have a team that is already operating servers and keeping these up and running. So all the responsibility for keeping the service up is on their own side, which means that they don't have to pay so much money to me. For them, the service or the software is way more cheaper than getting as a like a hosted service
Service.
or managed
Mm,
service. So it's yeah. So this is one example.
that's
The
cool.
other
And
the other example I would like to mention is these big whale customers, because in one workplace it was actually one of my favorite job places like ever. It was like really cool company. We were doing quite cool stuff, but we only had one customer. It was this
mm,
one big telco who the company had like a contract that was like renewed yearly. So every year the contract was renewed, and they basically paid the full like the money
amount.
needed to operate the amount needed to operate the company for 1 year, which was great until it lasted, because at one point telco said, okay, we don't need this service anymore so much. We are decreasing our
Yeah.
amount 40%, so we pay 60% this year. And it meant just that the company suddenly just overnight had to start letting go people and so on, because there was not enough money anymore. So it was so having these whale customers that have leverage on you is not something that I want to have. So I provide the exact same service to all my customers, uh, meaning that it doesn't matter if it's just a one-person development agency or a large bank. They get the same subscription plan and pay the same amount of money,
Smart.
which is not big anyway. But this way, no one can say that okay, we need. They can't drive the product plan either. They can't say that okay, if you don't do this or that, then we are canceling our contract, and you have to start working for them basically. Now I can just say if you don't like it, then just go find some other provider. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and be
Because
done with
it's
it.
just Yeah, because it's less than 1% of maybe 0.5% or even less of revenue that they will lose, which is something that they can accept. Which also I leave a lot of money on the table because they would be willing to pay much more than I ask for them now. But it just makes things
Yeah,
easier
it's
to just have this one fixed plan. Everybody gets the exact same thing. I don't need to worry about or even negotiate anything or provide some premium customer service or anything. Just I can
yeah,
just
it is what it is, and
yeah,
you
it
can
is what
use
it
it.
is. That I have made this one off deals. Sometimes some customers or companies want some. I've done this selling this one-time subscription plan for uh, enough money, I would say, maybe some company, like an enterprise company, cannot pay by credit card or cannot pay like a recurring fee, or they really need to get me into their vendor database before they can pay out anything. So with them, I've made this deal that hey, you pay quite a lot of premium, but you will get just this never expiring subscription, just
Okay.
one-time payment, and just you get the go application, you can start using it. And after the deal is made and I have raised the money, I also don't care what happens next because there is no contract to renew, but they already paid me up. Ahead large number of years of this service basically. And as I don't provide the real service but only sell license keys, then I don't have to worry that after 5 years suddenly the customers is
Something
going
breaking.
negative because they paid so little money that I'm paying on top of it or something. So it's not an issue at all.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's good. So one last question I have for you is being a solo founder, right? If something breaks, there is no one to help you, it's you. If something goes wrong, if whatever it is, right? Users need you, something breaks, it's always you that needs to do that, and you need to do everything, like from marketing it. Okay, you have your open source things, open source projects that help with that, but everything is you. How do you make a line between your work and then your actual life, right? Where do you find the balance?
Well,
How?
that's how I've built up the company is that when something breaks, I'm not in a hurry to fix it. So I don't have to fix it right now. I can do it if something breaks at Friday evening, I can just wait until Monday morning and when I go to office, then start working on it. Because I'm not keeping any service up. The only service that I keep up is the license key subscription service. And if it goes down, that nothing happens. Maybe some customer that wanted to sign up during the weekend cannot sign up because it's not working, the sign up page, but that's it. It's not much happens if I don't react right away. I can just wait until regular business hours. I don't have to work on evenings or at night or whatever. So this is one of the reasons why I built my company up the way it is that I don't have to react right now, never. Maybe
This is
only
great.
times when I do is that when I see that somebody tries to really sign up, but something is blocking them. They want to pay for
Mhm.
me, but something is going like broken or whatever. Then this is when I usually start reacting because
Makes
this is
sense, yeah.
but if it's somebody writes to me that okay, we have this server that it's crashing a lot, then I will start looking into it in Monday at 9, but whenever I go to the office.
Nice. Yeah, this was great conversation. Thank you very much. Like, I think your proof is that you don't need VC money, a co-founder, or a huge team to build something real, something that makes a lot of money and is profitable. You just need to keep working on it and have a strategy. And yeah, that's great. Do you want to plug anything? Like, where can people find you, find your stuff?
Emailengine.app is the website for my product, so you can find all the relevant links there.
Amazing. Yeah, guys, go check that out, and thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.